Alrighty, welcome everyone. My name is Lainey Escarcega. I'm a representative from the Lincoln Health Network. My team and I are very excited to have you all join us for the great panel we have prepared for you all today on achieving patient centricity in oncology with data-driven approaches. We're also thrilled to be joined by our sponsor, Lore.io, developers of life sciences analytics packages for clinical operations, pre-commercial, medical affairs, and commercial operations. Today's panel will be moderated by Janardhan Prasad, CBO and Head of Life Sciences at Lore.io, and he will be joined by a distinguished panel of 4 women, including Varsha Domle, the Senior Director of Commercial Analytics and Operations at Sierra Oncology, Kate Dennis, the Director of Marketing and Sales Analytics at Guardant, Dr. Tina Gariantes, Senior Vice President of Research and Development at Linnaeus, and Shobha Gopalan, Executive Director of Program Management at ChemoCentrix. Before we get started, I would like to encourage everyone to take advantage of the Q&A button that you should see at the very bottom of your Zoom screen. Our panelists will be saving questions for the very end. However, I encourage you all to please submit any questions that come to mind throughout the webinar. That's about it for me. I hope you all enjoy this discussion. And without further ado, I'll hand off to our moderator, Janardhan. Janardhan, it's a pleasure to have you, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you for the introduction, Lenny, and thanks for organizing this event. I'm excited to be joined by our distinguished panel today. And thank you for joining the session today and finding time out of your busy schedule to join us for this interesting discussion today. So let's get started. Let me start with my first question for Tina and Shobha. Both of you have extensive experience in life sciences. How have things changed over the last decade? Would you like to provide us a few based on your observations?
Sure, I'd be happy to give you some basic ideas. I think one of the most interesting things in oncology and actually across the sciences, has been the change in modalities that people are looking for in new pharmaceuticals. CRISPR has opened up gene editing to a tremendous extent. And on top of that, there's a lot more non-small molecules. So I think that is one of the things. I think on the funding realm, there's a lot more funding of platform-based technologies that were in favor probably more like 20 years ago and then went out and then came back. So just a few of the many things that are changing.
Interesting. Shobha?
10 years ago, we did not have access to data easily about, for example, about disease genetics, patient data, or ongoing clinical trials, competition, etc. Today, all that has changed dramatically. Biotech companies, especially small biotech companies, can now easily access this kind of data, understand the playing field, and plan for success. And all this has been made possible because of the computational capabilities. And that is what has made approach from discovery to treatment very holistic. And because the researchers have easy access to this kind of data, they can screen libraries, develop molecules that are target specific to the disease, look at like patient genetics, and then that's how they make it more specific to the disease type. What's the patient type? And as a result, this is what has helped transform the field completely in the last 10 years, the computational capabilities. And that is what is the exciting development from my perspective.
Very interesting. Looks like we have come a long way over last 10 years. Very interesting. Kate, you have moved from like other companies, other therapeutic areas to diagnostics recently. And Varsha, you have gone from various other drugs to oncology drugs. Have you seen the difference in how data is leveraged for patient experiences between your like current role and your previous roles? Kate, you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Janardhan. So, from my perspective, for me personally, the change from therapeutics into diagnostics was thinking about how we can partner with clinicians and therefore effectively with their patients more directly in that diagnostic space versus therapeutics. In diagnostics, we're really providing a set of tools that can guide the clinician in how best to treat that patient versus, for example, thinking about a specific drug or a specific target. And so I think the way that we in diagnostics interact with the clinician is a little different. We, in many ways really partner with those clinicians to help them figure out what is the best way to treat my patient and to provide personalized medicine to that patient. And so we, as a diagnostic company, also really try to be of service to that clinician through providing genomic specialists, for example, who can help those clinicians interpret the data that they have as well. And because we're not typically tied to a single drug or a single genomic target, we're really focused on arming clinicians with the best information that they can have to make an informed treatment decision. So for me personally, that's something that I've noticed as a real transition from therapeutics into the diagnostic space.
Very interesting. Varsha, your thoughts, please?
Yeah, and if I could add to that, well, first, thank you for the opportunity. I'm really excited to be here on the panel with all of these wonderful, accomplished ladies. So thanks again. My thoughts are, I'm just going to go off of what Shobha and Tina said, is there's just been this explosion in the data sets that have become available. There used to be a time when, and I'm speaking from my perspective on, how commercial operations has evolved over time. There used to be a time when we had to pretty much be content with prescription data at the physician level. And, that was the gold standard. And that was about all the transparency and visibility we had. But now with longitudinal patient claims data, lab test results, EMR data, there's just been an explosion, like I said, and that helps us track the patient journey. And, going off of what Shobha said, it's how do we help physicians make those diagnoses, earlier on where patients just have better access to treatments that are available on the market. So that's been my take on this. And the other thing is, with more and more drugs moving to the specialty channel and with patient hubs becoming sort of the norm here, it's improving or making it a frictionless experience for patients to get on therapy, stay on therapy longer. And it's given rise to all of these new roles in the industry, patient navigators and nurse educators and what have you. So I think all of this ties into how the industry is moving to, really put the focus on patients and just having that patient-centric model.
Thank you, Varsha. Looks like, especially in oncology, I think data plays a very important role, right from early diagnosis all the way to giving the right treatment to making sure that patient recovers from whatever disease they've been suffering in. Very, very interesting. Tina, moving back to the R&D side, you lead R&D efforts at a clinical stage oncology company. How do the data needs change from discovery into going to the clinical trials? Tina?
In early discovery, you have a tremendous, very, very tiny bit of data on a tremendous number of compounds. And you're asking one simple question, and then you're trying to put in a few other small pieces of data to prioritize where you're going. In the clinic, you have a handful of patients, or maybe dozens of patients in early trials, and you're trying to learn as much as you possibly can about them and pick out information that might be hidden. So just to give you some examples of the kinds of questions that we can ask if we really have access to the data, is in our trial currently, we just realized that we're stopping metastasis, okay? And it's not a question that's typically asked, but by having access to the data and searching it in unusual ways, you can see that all of the patients, treated with our drug basically have no new metastases. So that's, really very powerful. And the other thing that I'm seeing is, I'll give you another example. The drug is dropping LDL, which is kind of a positive side effect. But, to see that, you have to be able to integrate multiple data sources and be able to look at them holistically. You have to be able to go into what were their prior treatments, what are their comorbidities, what is the genetics, what's the literature saying, what's the real-time clinical data. And that's not something that we've been able to do in the past. So.
Okay, interesting. And looks like you are able to do it now. Interesting.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Good to hear that. Kate, some statistics from American Cancer Society that cancer is responsible for nearly 1 in 6 deaths globally. And the big validation is that early cancer diagnosis saves lives and cut the treatment costs. Your thoughts on how molecular diagnostic companies are helping the patient community and how data is being used to achieve that?
Yeah, thanks, Janardhan. I think we would all agree that the best treatment for cancer is to catch it as early as possible, right? The idea is what can you do when it's still localized and it can be, surgically resected, for example. And so we in the diagnostic space are not only thinking about the metastatic patient population and helping get those patients on their best targeted therapy, for example, but also thinking about all of the genomics that we've now understood in that late stage setting. Can we now apply that to see earlier in patients to get an earlier look into patients who maybe have localized localized cancers? And in general, if we think about the data, coming back to the data, you cited ACS in terms of 1 in every 6 deaths globally, but we also know that there are certain cancer types like colorectal cancer, like breast cancer, that have very robust screening algorithms for an average risk patient to go and get screened for cancer early in the hopes of catching that cancer early. But the unfortunate reality is when you look at that data, the compliance with some of those screening modalities is not where we would like it to be. In the case of colorectal cancer, the goal set by the CDC is that 80% of average risk patients will get screened for colorectal cancer. And unfortunately, it's been in the high 60% for a while now. And so in the diagnostic space, in particular molecular diagnostics, we're trying to leverage the databases that we've developed in the metastatic setting to look for signals in the early detection space as well. And in particular, with this compliance challenge that I mentioned, thinking through how can we overcome some of those compliance challenges with, for example, a simple blood test. And so we're really trying to think through, how do we get more patients screened so that we can help see these cancer diagnoses earlier. And that's coming through blood tests, through leveraging genomic data sets, and also understanding information about how patients flow through, for example, primary care clinics to actually identify patients who should be getting screening but are getting missed or aren't following through with the recommendation for their primary care physician, so they can get an easier test early on in the hopes of catching that cancer early.
Very nice. Good to hear about all the research and all the activities that are happening. And in fact, today morning I was reading the news that for colon cancer, the diagnosis age has been dropped from 50 years to 45 years, and looks like not just patient, but I think regulation is also changing and encouraging early diagnosis. Very nice. What are you, at the start of the conversation, you mentioned about building patient journey based on like EMR data, lab data, and every year I think 15 to 20 million new patients are getting diagnosed with cancer. How can emerging biopharma companies learn from patients who have gone through various treatments over last like 10, 15 years? How does the historical patient data help companies like Sierra to prepare for their first drug launch?
Yeah, good question. So yes, 15 to 20 million new patients, but cancer is really, it's many different diseases, right? We tend to lump everything together under the umbrella term. But for a company planning its first commercial launch like Sierra is, I think all of this rich data sort of widens the aperture on how do we even drive the diagnosis, right, correctly? Because there is misdiagnosis happening. We know this all the time. So what are the sort of, can we use EMR data, lab data? I know now in the oncology space with personalized medicine coming to the forefront, there's genetic markers and other biomarkers. The data is slowly but surely becoming available to the commercial team. So it's really trying to paint this picture of who are the patients who should be getting that diagnosis, and also identifying current pain points, because for some of these more rarer diseases, patients sometimes go through multiple rounds of seeing physicians to get that accurate diagnosis. So what's the referral pattern there, and is there a way to intercept the patient while they're on that journey to shorten the time between symptoms and diagnosis? So those are the things that we study in preparing for our new launch. And like Kate said, at the end of the day, it's all about serving the patient. The tools in our toolbox from a commercial operations perspective are a little bit different. So we do try to empower our medical science liaisons with the information to speak to physicians and make sure that they're aware of the disease and all of the different symptoms or markers that can help make them confident in giving the patient that diagnosis. So again, it's just moving that a little bit upstream from a product commercialization perspective and arming the MSLs before the drug has actually been approved and hits the market.
Interesting. And Shobha, I think since we are talking about patient centricity, it is known that patient advocacy groups are leveraging data for better collaboration with healthcare and life sciences companies. How are patient advocacy groups helping with this?
Yeah, thanks, Janardhan. Before I answer that, I want to quickly echo Varsha's sentiments. I'm really honored to be part of this panel, and thanks for having me here.
Okay.
Regarding advocacy groups, I wanted to share that, I have been, as we are getting ready for launch, we have been participating with advocacy groups, and there is an organization advocating for rare diseases known as National Organization for Disorders, or NORD. And their motto is, alone we are rare, together we are strong. And to me, this neatly sums up what advocacy groups are all about. And thanks to the advocacy groups, there is a lot more awareness of the diseases and patients and so forth. And as a result, there is more and more drugs that are being developed for orphan and rare diseases. So for biotech companies, for example, it's important to know where these patients are, what is the disease type, and that's where the advocacy groups bring the patient voice in all stages of drug development, including delivery and follow-up. So advocacy groups use, again, computational tools like Twitter, Facebook, create support groups and communities for the patients, families, physicians, research, as well as I said, work with biotech companies to develop drugs for rare diseases. And they also have access to ongoing clinical trials, so they are able to help the patients and tell them these are all the possible open clinical trials, and you can enroll in them, and they bring the voice of the patient to advisory committees when a drug is being evaluated by the FDA. So in summary, I see advocacy groups as a godsend for orphan and rare diseases.
Very nice. Good to hear that. In fact, I think all the industries have realized the power of voice of customer. And in this case, yeah. I think I can see we are not just restricted to the claims and lab and EHR data or genomics data. We are actually going to social media. We are having discussions with the patients and really involving them and collaborating with them to solve the problems that exist. So very nice. Yeah. Tina, next question is mainly on you. When we are talking about, let's say, the patient enrollment, and then when we enroll the patients, I'm talking mainly phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials. We enroll the patients, and there are some patient-reported outcomes, right? So, what challenges do the clinical research team or the R&D teams face in these early phases of the trial, and how does data and analytics help in early stages?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely a challenge for a lot of the early stage studies. A lot of them are basket studies or all-comer studies of some sort. And so you're looking, but on the other hand, all the funding groups are looking for actual responses in a very heterogeneous and small population of late stage patients. So it's a real challenge for the biotechs to figure out what is the best place for me to go. What is the major unmet medical need what is recruitable. Often those two things are kind of antithetical to each other. What's going to give me my highest probability of success? How can it, if it's going to take me 3 years to recruit or 3 years to get an endpoint, that's probably not livable for an early biotech. So there's an awful lot of different pieces that have to come together, and you have to be asking a lot of questions. And often it's only 1 or 2 patients in your early study that are telling you where you need to go, because the preclinical models that you have in cancer, they're getting better, but none of them are perfect, right? We can cure cancer in mice. We can't cure it in humans traditionally because the models aren't really representative of what's happening in a human. So it's the challenge is being able to, look holistically at the data and pull out the information that is really useful so that you can balance all of these needs.
Nice, interesting, Tina. And I think what I'm hearing a lot in this panel is that I think all of you are using data very, very heavily, be it for clinical, be it for commercial. But I checked your background, and most of you have very strong scientific backgrounds. In fact, some of you come from non-engineering backgrounds as well. Did data and engineering terms like SQL, data warehouse, did they scare you at first? And maybe let me start with Kate. Kate, how was your experience like getting introduced to these terms, and now you are a master of this? How was your journey there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, good question, Janardhan. I think, as you highlighted, I think a lot of us have that kind of scientific background, have always been working with numbers and analytics and data-driven hypotheses and so on. And so, the quote unquote engineering terms of like a SQL and a data warehouse, to me, it's a means to an end. And what I mean by that is it's a way to aggregate all of that information and bring it together. But ultimately, our job as a marketing analytics group, for example, is to think about the hypothesis that we have in the data, test that hypothesis in the data. We're fortunate enough that we are able to partner with those in our organization who are, the software engineering type experts that can help us build a data warehouse that we can then query, for example. So I would say it doesn't scare me per se. It's another means to the end. It's a tool to get me to the answers that we're looking for, whether or not it's something about, identifying something about the adoption journey that clinicians take when they're starting to order our tests, whether or not it's something to do with which physicians are testing for guideline recommended genomic targets versus those that aren't. It's sort of a means to the end. And even when we're looking at things like digital activity, digital marketing campaigns, again, we might work with that team to bring in data from a third-party vendor, for example, but then it's in a format that we can then query, test our hypotheses, look at the impact, and so on.
Very nice.
Hopefully that helps address.
Shobha, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Kate that it's a means to an end. And it's not the word that is as important, or the terms like SQL and database, but it's more that the tools that they represent. And as a consumer of data, I am looking for tools for rapid access, help me store data and analyze it. And I want access to unified digestible data. So today, the tools are becoming more than just tools. They assist intuitively in collaboration within and across teams and companies. They turn raw data into unified and accessible information, and then structure them for someone like me who wants to use it and be able to understand it, digest it, and interpret it. For example, analyzing patient information for rapid analysis and knowledge generation, or bringing in data from clinical trials. And this was not possible like 10, 15 years ago, as we talked earlier. And not could I have imagined then. Innovative companies like yours, Lower IO, and others have created integrated platforms that bring data in from, for example, clinical trials. Companies can look at the KPIs of the trial, in parallel expedite pre-commercial launch readiness with analytics using claims data and reference data for account profiling, patient journey, and competitor analysis. And also support medical affairs teams so they can plan their strategic engagement and build relationships. And this is all possible because of data not just being in the raw form, but being in a form that one can, understand, digest it, and interpret it, and plan for success.
Nice. Good to hear that. I would say, as an engineer, I'm happy to hear that. Looks like data is available, data is easily accessible, and looks like you're all happy with the development that has happened in this industry in terms of data and analytics. Varsha, I think you are pretty unique in this panel, and you can give me company. You come from an engineering background, right? And I'm sure you must be having your own struggle still when you started working with data. Do you think engineers can help non-engineers make sense of data without getting blocked by like IT or technology? And then what roles do these tools and technologies play in enabling these teams, and how can we get better at it? Varsha?
Yeah, it's a good question. And yes, I do have an engineering background, which I guess is a poorly kept secret because it's not something that I actively promote. Yes, there's definitely a role that tools and technology play in bringing insights to the table, right? Because yes, there's a lot of data, but how do you make sense of it? I value stories. Stories have been around for as long as humans have been around, and that's what resonates. And it's about as one of my mentors once told me, genius is not in making the complex complex, it's in making the complex simple. Because if it doesn't resonate with your stakeholders, they're not going to appreciate the work that went into generating those insights. So I agree with Shobha that tools such as Lore.io, and there's a few others on the market, they certainly bring powerful visualization capabilities, and self-serve analytics is the thing, right? You can slice and dice data the way you want it, apply filters, all of these features. But it's really, I think the role for someone in the analytics function is always going to be, how do you translate what you're seeing on the screen or on PowerPoint slides? How do you translate that to an audience who doesn't have the same kind of the luxury of time, right? They want to know the quick takeaways, and how do you get that to stick? So definitely the power of storytelling cannot be underestimated. It is difficult. It is a mountain that people my side of the fence continue to climb, and we keep looking for ways to partner with technology to make that climb a little easier.
Nice. I really like the point about storytelling part of it. I think that is the thing that that really makes it easy for anyone to adopt any technology. It's the story part. Coincidentally, I think the Lore.io term itself means story. Lore, the name, comes from story. We try to tell the data story to people irrespective of their technology background. So thanks for sharing your thoughts, Varsha, there on that. Tina, moving again back to the clinical side of it. In your role, how important is getting the early access, and how important it is to find early patterns in data, mostly in real time, instead of getting to know it after a week or month? How important is having early and real-time access to data?
It's extraordinarily important. I mean, I'm thinking, going back to the idea of stories, I'm thinking of a story where, in the pharmacovigilance realm, right? We have days to report to the FDA, and we have to interpret how related is this adverse event to a drug, right? And so you need to be able to get access to that data almost immediately, compare it to the data of what's happening on all the rest of the patients, integrate multiple data sets to come up with it. I'll give you one example that we had recently. We had a patient with a psychiatric side effect, or adverse event, I should say, connected with traumatic death in the family, divorce, insomnia, hypothyroidism, changes in SSRI, as well as opioid use. I mean, a million ways of looking at what was going on in this patient. And, it's important to us that we understand, is this related or is this unrelated to our drug, And we were able to show by having early access to this data and looking at it, that in fact, on top of everything else that was going on in this patient, if you dose the drug in the evening, people were getting insomnia. We knew this patient hadn't slept for 5 or 6 days because they had travel anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. But, it all came down to, being able to understand what's going on and be able to separate out what is related and what isn't related. And that's just one example. I'm sure everyone has many examples of what you can do when you have real-time access and you can report accurately in just a few days.
Very nice. Very, very interesting. And I'm moving from like real time, which I think is very, very important these days. Everyone is also talking about real world data. So Shobha, this question is for you. How important is real world data for early stage biotech startups, let's say in 2021? And especially mainly the clinical as well as commercial teams, do you think using real world data, these teams can collaborate better?
Absolutely. Real world data, such as, for example, electronic medical record, clinical trials, is very crucial. And it is foundational to all that we have been talking about. Commercial teams, for example, need to have clear understanding and complete understanding of the real world data, because that represents for patients the disease and the market in which context of the market in which the drug will be deployed, even as we prepare for launch. They want to know who are the patients, what already exists to help these patients, what are the avenues that we can reach these patients, what is unique about the drug, how will it be labeled and how do we market it, where will the reimbursement streams come from and who the competition is. So that's for commercial teams. And then for clinical teams, it is important to understand who are the key opinion leaders. How should we design the clinical trial so we can maximize patient outcome and provide an edge over competition? And create and engage advocacy groups early so we can learn from them and stay sensitive to their concerns. And so hence collaboration between clinical and commercial is very important so they stay synergized and stay ahead of the coming challenges that they're going to face during and after launch. For me, I feel it's been very fortunate in my career because I have been able to manage programs spanning from pre-IND through phase 1, 2, 3 studies, working in parallel with CMC teams to develop the drug, and also have led teams through commercialization readiness planning and successful launches. And what I have learned is that patient and product, they pretty much remain the same, except it's going through clinical phases, commercial, finance, and all of that. So having access to real world data through integrated platforms, again, I bring up Lore.io because you're able to bring in data from clinical trials and similarly share the same data that commercial team can have access to. And so that makes it more nimble, knowing how competition is doing, analyzing the data, and so that we can be successful when we launch the drug.
Got it. Interesting. It looks like it's not just the collaboration with the patient, but also the collaboration within various teams in the organization that I think gives better results. Very interesting. Varsha, this next question is for you. How does data help in companies stay patient-centric and not just stay patient-centric? Like there is some existing patient experience, a patient journey. How can companies improve it? More specifically, how does the patient journey evolve with, let's say, the changing hypothesis or with more data points being available?
Yeah, I'm going to build on what Shobha said. So, and also break it up into, pre-commercial and post-commercial, because when we are thinking of the patient journey, for any company bringing a drug to market, clearly, I mean, they're bringing it to market because they believe there is an unmet need to be addressed. So we can use clinical data to sort of inform or segment patients into cohorts and see how they respond to the drug in clinical trials, and then bridge that over to commercial data to do like a lookalike analysis and identify patients similar to patients in your clinical trials and sort of predict beforehand what the outcomes are likely to be. So that's from a commercialization at the cusp of sort of this pre-commercial to post-commercial phase. once the product is out on the market, it's about driving patient adherence, making sure patients have access to treatment, like I mentioned earlier, and they stay on treatment. And this is where the role of specialty pharmacies or patient hubs becomes very crucial to make sure that, time to benefits investigation or time to first fill or refill, patient out-of-pocket burden, all of that is manageable and to where the patient continues staying on therapy. And I feel, manufacturers also, they recognize this and are putting all the tools in place to make sure that patients continue to have access to that therapy in this, ever-changing world of healthcare and life sciences.
Nice. And Kate, as a head of analytics for sales and marketing team, could you give us a few more examples? I know, Varsha took few examples. We have examples from clinical. Few more examples. What kind of analytics tools you are using, your team members are using, and how they're making better decisions using those tools?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in here, and I think I'll also piggyback off on some of the themes that we've already been chatting about, which is a lot of this idea of, what are we ultimately trying to do as analytics teams? We're trying to help tell a story and understand what is happening with perhaps our business from the sort of more internal perspective. How effective are we at driving our brand strategy, for example, and are there metrics that we can then see in prescriber data, for example, that are saying, hey, we're having success with this brand strategy, yes or no. Or early on developing target lists to arm a field force with who should we be engaging to ensure that patients are getting access to this test. So I bring that back to say it's partly a function of that storytelling side as well, because the tools that we use are a little bit of a function of where we are in developing that story. And what I mean by that is, when we're first thinking about a strategy of bringing a product to market or a test to market, in my case, in the diagnostic space, we want to understand the unmet need, as we've talked about already. And maybe we're doing that through market research and looking at claims data and looking at the patient journey. We then want to understand, okay, how does our product fit into this marketplace, and what's the value that we're bringing to clinicians and patients in bringing this product to market? And then once we've defined that value proposition and sort of bringing and built a brand strategy, are we successfully executing on that? And so dependent on where we are, I think we're using different tools, whether or not it's market research tools, whether it's secondary claims data sets. And then once we're in market and tracking whether or not, how effective are we at selling or how effective are we at delivering our brand strategy, it might be more internal data. And in the case of diagnostics, we have a lot of that data internal through our CRM, for example, and our lab information management systems. And so, in terms of the nitty-gritty tools, we're often piecing together that information, perhaps piping it into a data warehouse, and then bringing that data onto our own devices and so on. And very often, to be perfectly honest, using some of the standard tools that exist in that, I think it doesn't matter what industry and you're using. Excel, hate to raise the word, but I think we do a lot of our investigating still in understanding, building simple models in Excel. Maybe we're doing Tableau for visualization. And so it really depends on what part of the business question we're trying to understand. But very often the tools that we use are exploratory when we're first developing those hypotheses, and then maybe we settle on a metric and we say, hey, this is the metric that we want to be tracking, and now we move it into a more automated platform, like a Lore.io type platform, or a visualization tool like Tableau, to really then say, the reason why we're looking at this metric is because it's related to X, Y, and Z associated with our business, and now we want to arm the teams with quick and easy access to that information. But a lot of it on the front end is exploratory that we're doing through modeling, through Excel-based work, and so on.
Very interesting. Looks like you are working with many tools, and then there is no single tool that can do it all, depending upon various stages and depending on the kind of questions. There are various tools, and then I think Excel is still being used for that. Varsha, going back to your experience with patient journey, both pre-launch as well as when you said post-launch. I'll go very specifically on the tools and technology that you use for self-serve analysis. So what kind of tools and technology that you use, Varsha, for let's say the patient journey, but for self-serve analysis?
Yeah. Some of the tools. I mean, yeah, Excel. I remain a fan. I think Excel is a very powerful tool. And the others I've used, there's things like Alteryx that we've used in the past. I am excited by what I see Lore.io has to offer. So I know you have powerful visualization techniques and the whole self-service capability. So looking forward to the technologies evolving, the ones that exist and new ones being introduced to the marketplace.
Good to hear that. Kate, you said, at times you analyze, you come up with some hypotheses, you go back to your team. So I'm curious, how much do you depend on the development of your own custom dashboards versus the pre-existing solutions? Like you said Tableau, you said Excel, you said Lore.io. How do you strike a balance between pre-built and custom and changing it constantly?
Yeah, I think there is a balance. I think there are some basic metrics that almost any team will be looking at, regardless of the product or the test. In my case, in our case, test per MD, for example. Are you getting new customer acquisition, new physicians who are ordering, and so on? So there are certainly things that are more out of the box, let's call it. But I think it also is a function, again, coming back to brand strategy. What is your brand strategy and how is that evolving through time? And maybe, as you come to market and in those first, in the case of a drug, the first 6 months, so critical. In the case of diagnostic, it tends to be a slower burn, let's call it, and a slower growth. But your goal might be in year one, new acquisitions, and later on in year 3, year 4, year 5, it's depth of ordering, how many tests are being ordered, or how many RXs, and so on. So I think that we do build our own custom dashboards, but and those are maybe evolving. But then once we've built a look at data, we then try to translate that across into a more automated tool, a visualization tool, a platform. Because once we settle in on those metrics, we don't want to be spinning, an Excel dashboard every week. But we might evolve that dashboard dependent on where we are in the launch cycle, for example.
Nice. So looks like there'll always be a stable set of things that everyone will use, and there's a need for agility and things evolve. And then I think all the companies are striking a balance between what part is fixed and what part keeps evolving. Very nice. Moving from, I would say, data discussion to a very, very important discussion. And this question is for almost everyone in the panel. It's a very sensitive but very, very important topic. And this is about gender diversity, especially in healthcare and life sciences industry. I've seen a lot of women leaders. I'm honored to host 4 such incredible women leaders today. Couple of questions for all of you. How can life sciences industry provide a pathway for women returning to work and advancing in their careers? Tina, Shobha, do you want to go first?
Sure, why not? So for me, I feel it's a two-way street, right? It's not just the women who are returning back to work, but it's also the company should have an open mind and willing to be flexible. So one of the things I think the pandemic has forced us to do is shown us that we all can use technology to actually work from home and have flexibility and don't have to be in the office 24/7, and we're still performing and conducting business as usual. So for the women who are coming back, my suggestion and my advice would be that find mentors in the industry. Make sure that you are open to part-time positions so you can come back in slowly. And also look for companies where these mentors are, and they can influence the companies to provide flexibility in working hours and provide working from home options when needed. Tina?
Thanks. Tina?
Sorry, forgive me, I was muted. I think there's a lot that we can do for women. I think, and there's a lot of opportunity in the industry for women. They can, basically, there are a tremendous number of women already in the life sciences, not typically at the highest levels, but throughout the life sciences. So I think there are ways of finding people that they can work with and contacts for networking to come back into the organizations. And then I think I couldn't agree more with Shubha about, find mentors, find champions that are going to support you to develop as you move through your career. And one of the other things that is I've seen over the years is, if you're in a meeting, you're there for a reason, sit at the table, join, take your place. And I think that will grow women much faster than what we've seen historically.
I think that's very important. Kate, Varsha, just adding on to this topic, do you have any advice for women who are aspiring to become leaders in the life sciences industries? What kind of advice you will give? Varsha, you want to go first?
Sure. My advice would be, and this is something that I have to continually remind myself of, so I'm just as guilty, is to, go for that stretch role, not be shy from opportunity, because no one was really born knowing how to do things, right? It's not like people were born with the knowledge of how do you stand up a trade and distribution network, or how do you build a cloud data warehouse. So yeah, just take some calculated risks. I agree, find that champion, find the mentor. But even if you don't be shy, to go it. And also remember to sort of pay it forward, because once you have the opportunity to get to wherever you want to get to and fulfill your dreams, be that mentor for others who are trying to follow in your footsteps, because you can't be what you can't see. So if you've made it, then you're an example to others. So just pay it forward.
I think that's very important. Kate, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like you've all three touched on something that I was going to say as well, but it's good to see that we're consistent in our themes. I think coming back to what you said, Shobha, that flexibility is that two-way street. And prior to being at Garden, I was in consulting. I was at ZS Associates, and ZS, I think I always look to, I think they did a very nice job, even in a consulting model, of allowing people, whether or not male or female by that matter, to have a flexible work schedule and to actually commit to, instead of being staffed 40 hours a week, being staffed on client work for 30 hours a week. I mean, consulting, I think we all know that you're probably not stopping at 30 hours a week, but at least you're not, 80 hours a week. And so having that flexibility and having a path for people to still be promoted while taking on a role that's maybe 75% time, for example, and not preventing that from not having that be a reason to cap somebody's development and growth, I think is critical. And then, just quickly to what Tina and Varsha both said, Tina, I think you sort of made that comment about sitting at the table. If you're being invited to things, contribute, speak your mind, kind of contribute to that conversation. And I think that is so critical. If you've been invited to that room, or you've been given an opportunity to stretch, as you mentioned, Varsha, stand up and grab onto it, and know that we don't all know the answers, but we will never know the answers if we don't start working towards it. So I completely agree with those. And then, the final piece that I would just say is, one of the things that I've tried to adopt is this idea as well with my team of this concept of servant leadership, and really keeping it as a two-way street. You're also leading by serving others as well, and becoming a resource to your team, and a resource to both seniors in your organization and juniors in your organization. And I think that people then can sort of really see how you're contributing throughout, and give you an opportunity to grow.
Got it. And then last question from my side, and maybe we can keep it kind of a rapid fire. Since we are talking about if you're on the table, participate, contribute, on the other side of the table, there are men. So what advice all four of you would have for men on the table, how they can support women in advancing their careers and make an impact? And then maybe we can keep it open for all four. Tina, do you want to start first?
Sure. A few things that come to mind. One thing is, when an opportunity arises, just stop for 30 seconds and think, are there any women who can fill that role, right? Sometimes you end up having your favorites. There are people who are very similar to you in some way, but if you take one step back, pause a second, you'll come up with a number of other options, and that will help promote diversity in your teams. One thing is, we all know that no one does this alone. You do it by promoting the people in your team, by giving them opportunities, by developing your team, by helping others. That's the kind of thing that everyone needs in the workplace, but it particularly helps those who, may not be as comfortable asking for that kind of help. And one of the other things, a lot of women, a lot of men too, but a lot of women have an awful lot on their plate, right? There's sandwiched between their children, the elderly, health issues, who knows what. When someone comes to you and is asking for an accommodation of any kind, I always like to think, is there any reason why I really can't do it? And if there isn't a really good reason to say no, say yes and just say, we'll revisit this in a week or a month or however long is reasonable. You'll get an awful lot of loyalty from your teams, and you'll be supporting a lot more diversity in your teams.
Nice. Kate, do you want to go next? Kate?
Yeah, I don't think I'll say too much more other than completely agree, Tina. And I think it comes back to flexibility. Provide people the flexibility and have that trust that they're leveraging that flexibility to excel in their role and to be the most productive, not trying to skirt around an issue, but empower people to leverage flexibility when they need it.
Okay. Varsha?
Yeah, similar. I mean, I echo what Tina and Kate said, is just, be that coach and encourage diversity. So not just diversity of gender, but diversity of opinions, thoughts, ideas.
Nice. And Shava, I know you have been mentors to many, so your closing remarks on this topic.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it goes back to what Tina said. Somebody gave me an opportunity, believed in me, and, supported me. And that's how I am where I am today. And I'm grateful for that. And my goal in life is to pay it forward. And how can I help the women? And that's what I would say for all men, is put yourself in that woman or that person's shoe and see what they're asking for, and how you can be there for them and support them whenever you're able to. So again, thank you so much, Janardhan, and all you ladies on this panel. It has really been an awesome experience for me.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the panelists for their very insightful answers. I hope audience got to know these panelists better and got some answers. This concludes the discussion portion of the event. If you have more questions, then feel free to put it on the chat, and feel free to reach out to us later if you have any questions. A couple of questions from the audience. So I think first question, Kate, I think maybe you can answer this question. Kate, can you hear me? Yep. It will be, could you please talk about some of the common barriers that you see from the diagnostic side, specifically where tests are available for screening? Kate?
Janardhan, I think Kate is trying to connect back to the audio.
Let's move to the next question. Shava, next question is in fact for you. Someone wants to know, could you please talk about, from a real world perspective, how patient-reported experiences data are being used in oncology settings?
Absolutely. And one of the, I think the most important things that patient data is being used by, and patients' insights and voices being used by, is the systematic approach adopted by the FDA for patient-focused drug development, and in oncology and other drugs too. And we see a result of this, especially because we have seen so many new drugs being approved and available for saving patient lives. So what the FDA has done based on the patient-focused drug development program is they are facilitating and advancing use of systematic approaches to collect and utilize robust and meaningful patient as well as caregiver input. They are encouraging identification and use of approaches and best practices to facilitate patient enrollment and minimizing burden of patients to participate in clinical trials. So essentially, encouraging that, enhancing understanding and appropriate use of methods to capture information on patient preferences and potential acceptability. I think that's where the most benefit is. Kate, I'll get back to you. I think you're connected.
Kate, looks like your audio is back. Yeah, Kate, now that your audio is
yes,
back.
I'm sorry about that. Terribly sorry.
So Kate, can you talk about some of the common barriers that you see from diagnostic side, specifically where tests are available for screening?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think very often the biggest barriers on diagnostic testing is simply getting the test done. It sounds like a simple thing to say, but just ensuring follow through on the test is critical. And also ensuring that that test is inexpensive, especially on the screening side of things. For an asymptomatic average risk patient, who may see value in getting testing, but is not willing to pay and rightly shouldn't have to pay a lot of money to get access to a test. And so, I think that there are a few things as diagnostic manufacturers that we can do. We need to help educate in partnership with primary care physicians why it's important to complete screening. We need to ensure that the test that is being done is appropriately sensitive and specific and has been validated in a clinical trial. But then most importantly, that it's a test that is easy for that patient to get done. And, I think, again, coming back to the idea of a blood test, the value there is that you can have a physician have a one-on-one conversation with that patient. And for example, colorectal cancer screening, talk to them about the benefits of why you should be getting screened, why it's important, and then immediately draw the blood. And that's what our goal is for the future as we bring to market a blood test, is to help address that compliance challenge rather than having that conversation, having a patient agree, but then they need to go and see another specialist to get screening, or they need to go, in the case of breast cancer screening, to a mammography clinic. And in that, you have this opportunity for the patient to say, you know what, actually, it's not that important, or there's some life gets in the way and you don't follow through on it. So I think, to me, those are the biggest barriers for screening tests in particular.
Third question is mainly around tools and technologies. Maybe I'll request both Tina and Kate to talk about from clinical as well as commercial side. So the question is, with the latest tools and technologies and sophisticated data available in the market, how much time saving do we see in the process of drugs getting approved early? And is it available to the patient compared to the last couple of decades? Tina, you want to go first?
Sorry. Yeah, sure. I think we're actually seeing quite a bit of shortening of the time, not in any particular study, but people are able to do more intelligent studies, and you're seeing approvals often for kind of niche indications as the tip of the iceberg. And those are being identified because of the access to broad arrays of information, both public information as well as better access to detailed information coming from the trials. So I think people are able to focus their trials more intelligently, find secondary and tertiary indications they can get a quick approval for, and then come back.
To add more from the sales and marketing side and commercial side, is good.
Yeah, I can just chime in and add one more thing here, and I don't pretend to be the expert on this, but the other thing that I think is helping to accelerate some of these synthetic in trial design, where we're actually leveraging genomic databases coupled with real world evidence through EMR records, for example, where you can actually see, based on a review of those EMR records, what have the patient outcomes been, and then design an appropriate synthetic arm, which I think is also helping to accelerate some of these trials as well, hopefully bringing drugs to market in a shorter time frame, but still with the rigor that is needed.
We are already at the top of the hour, so thank you, everyone. Thanks, Tina. Thanks, Shobha. Thanks, Varsha. Thanks, Kate, for joining us for this very informative session. Personally, it was very, very informative. And thanks to all the people in the audience for finding time and dialing in for this session. What we will do is we will end this session, but feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to connect with Varsha, Kate, Tina, and Shobha offline through LinkedIn, through email. We have it on the screen. Feel free to reach out to me if you have more questions about like data, technology, oncology, women leadership. looking forward to getting some feedback on that.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you all.